What is it that people are seeing? Is it a man? An animal? A myth? Or something else? Are they delusional? Are they lying? Some are pastors. Some are law enforcement. Some are military. If they are delusional liars, why do we trust them to lead us to God? To put people in jail and to protect our way of life? Why are their words and actions good enough for that? But when it comes to experiencing something out of the ordinary, something fascinating, something possibly terrifying, they become a fool, a joke, an idiot. Not here. We are the Big Dog T2B. Welcome to the show. Hello everyone, my name is Jack, and welcome to the Big Dog T2B. As usual, we have the founder of the Big Dog T2B, Nathan Bowling, with us. How you doing, Nate?
Well, I'm good, Jack. There again, if I was much better, I couldn't stand it.
And tonight's guest is Fox. Fox hails from the great state of Florida. How you doing, Fox?
Hey, how you doing, Jack? How you doing, Nate?
I'm good. Good to have you here.
Thank you, sir.
Not too bad. So Fox hails from the great state of Florida, and he is a nuisance animal trapper and wildlife manager for different folks that have property down there in Florida. He works periodically and interfaces with the Florida Wildlife Commission. Several years ago, back in 2015, Fox suffered a severe traffic accident. Once upon a time, one percenter talked about a biker and a patch he wore on his vest, and that wasn't a guy that you wanted to mess with. And then 1%er became something about how much money you made. Fox is a 7%er. After his accident, he was given a 7% chance of surviving. And that was just surviving. And he did. After that, Fox went through a lot of physical therapy for a traumatic brain injury, shattered bones, and other things. Most people like that would go on some type of full disability, but not Fox. Fox is back out there. He's making a living. He's raising his son in the old way, trapping and fishing. So tell us, Fox, what got you into this whole thing?
First and foremost, I'd just like to say to your audience, and I've, of course, gotten to know you and Nate, and I really care about y'all a lot, and what you're doing it's really helping so many people. But I just have always spoken from my heart, so I don't have a script or notes or anything, and I hope that, the audience will really feel that more importantly than anything. I know there's folks out there that haven't had experiences, and they may even be doubtful that these creatures exist. But spending most of my life in the wilderness and working with the animals most of my life, I can tell you there's something out there for sure. All these people can't be wrong after all these years. You got so many people in so many different walks of life that are credible, and you can't, discount all their testimony. So that's the first thing that I think logically people should think about. In answering your question, Jack, what got me into this was, above anything, because this is important, it actually started out with just my faith, and I have faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. And I know that might perhaps turn some people off a little bit because they're like, oh no, not another one, not another hypocritical, judgmental Christian, that doesn't live the life and talks a good game. But I just want to say to that, if people really know who the Lord Jesus Christ was and what he stood for, how he really cared about the outcast and the people no one else cared about. And they didn't just believe all the lies and things that are taught in the modern day church nowadays. They too would be believers, a lot of them, and they would feel, more importantly, the kind of love that he's always had for them. And so with that said, I've been a Christian since I was a little boy. When no one else was around, the Lord always was. I have walked through those valleys in the shadow of death, and not because I'm some great man am I still standing, but just because of my humbleness and my faith in my King, because he is my King. Going into my encounter, it all started when I was a little boy. I grew up in Florida, in a very rural area. I grew up back in the day when there was segregation going on and unfortunately rioting and things like that. And, you know, we had a lot of plantations here in Florida. There was a lot of unfortunate racism and things like that still going on and prevalent. But I was blessed with a mother that was from Spain. My grandfather was from Spain, and they raised me with very old-fashioned values. I had other people in my life that also raised me with those kind of values. I'm so thankful for that. You might say I'm not your typical modern day guy. You know, I'm very old-fashioned in my values. I'm not saying that makes me any better than anyone else. It's just who I am. I'm very country. I'm as country as you can get. I literally rodeoed when I was in middle school and high school. My class ring had a calf roper on it. I used to ride my horse to school. I was in FFA all my life. I played a lot of sports, mostly baseball, about 8 years. 2 of my buddies went pro. I did have scouts, you know, looking, and for whatever reason I chose different paths. But getting back to my encounters, when I was very little, we raised horses and cattle and crops. And we had a horse, one of our prized horses for that matter, that went missing. And we couldn't find him. You know, we looked everywhere for him, and we rode our horses all over the land. And even though we didn't own it, we had thousands of acres that was adjacent to our land. And we had access to it, and we leased some of it and whatnot. It was basically just for cattle and whatnot. We even rode all back in that land, and we looked all over. We never could find him. And about a week later, he ended up coming back onto our property. Well, when he did, and this is the only way I know to describe it, I don't believe in embellishing things. I don't want to, you know, pretend to be somebody I'm not. And I want to only, you know, tell my version of what I believe truly happened. So upon further examining this particular horse, it looked literally like a giant hand with giant razor-sharp claws had swiped down this horse from like the top of its head by its ear, and this was on the right side of the horse, by the way, all the way down to his gaskins, you know, to the middle of his shoulder. And I mean, when I say big, it looked like a gigantic hand. And if it was a bear, it had to have been the biggest bear I've ever heard of. And it just sliced this horse wide open. And we honestly didn't think the horse would live. We had, you know, a veterinarian friend and people that knew a lot about medical treatment and whatnot. And they came out and they doctored the horse up, and then we literally had the horse nurturing it for weeks at a time. And then finally this horse ended up making it. But when I look back on that experience, the only thing I could think of as a little boy was a monster got a hold of it. And my grandfather, who taught me a lot about the wilderness, tracking, trapping, you know, all about animals, he was even miffed by it. he could not believe or understand what got a hold of this horse. Now, they did say in their way of trying to put it in terms where they could make it understanding to themselves, a lot of people said, even the vet, that probably a Florida panther got a hold of it. Now, I've been privileged enough to see a true Florida panther, not a cougar, but a Florida panther out in the wild here in Florida. And it was full grown. And I've also seen them different exhibits and whatnot. And their paws would have never been big enough to do something like this. So I know it wasn't Florida panther. I know it wasn't a bear. Your explanation will be as good as mine, because for me it only could have been some kind of monster. That's the way I've always thought of it. Whatever did this was not just your average animal here in Florida. So that started it all for me. I started, really getting into monsters. That's the first thing I started doing. And back then, of course, we didn't have the internet and all these available resources to be able to research and find out anything you want to know nowadays. But we have books. So I started checking out all the books I could from the library and learning, all about the different monsters, werewolves and vampires and Loch Ness Monster and the Yeti, and then the Yeti led to Bigfoot, and then I started really getting interested in Sasquatch, because to me, he was predominantly a North American creature, especially derived from the folklore of the Native Americans. I figured, hey, this must be along the lines of what did that to that horse. So the more I started investigating, the more, as I got older, the more I heard about them, the more I learned about them, even though I still feel I'm an amateur at best with knowing, with knowledge on them. I started really absorbing and really just very much interest in Sasquatch. And then I will tell you, as I got older, where I grew up, it was not uncommon to hear about sightings, and they called them Bigfoot back then. You would always hear about Bigfoot sightings, and I'll never forget, my buddies and I were camping out one night. It was later at night, probably around 8:30, something like that, and we were camping, and we had a little fire going and everything. We were sitting around the fire, and we had the radio on. We were listening to country music. And we were actually, they had some kind of special on George Strait. So we all loved George Strait, and we were listening to him. Well, anyway, so on the radio, they had, how they had those emergency broadcasts and whatnot back then? Well, on our local radio, they had like a break in the music, and they said that Bigfoot had been spotted literally about 10 miles from where we were at. And another thing that was mighty peculiar, and this is all leading to other things in my future as I got older, but another thing that was really peculiar was we had a home burned down on us, and we lost everything we had at Christmas time. And we had these real wealthy friends of ours that owned a shrimping fleet. And they had a lot of money. They had a real nice guest home, a lot of land, everything. Well, they had told my mother that we could go and live in their guest home, which was really nice, Well, my mother said, no, we couldn't do that. Now, this was after months of me having to live with, I lived with one of my friends for a while, and this is silly. I've never told but a few people this, but I even had to wear girls' clothes to school for a while because we lost everything. So we had to take any hand-me-downs or whatever we had. And I remember being made fun of and everything, but I I didn't really care, to be honest with you, because I was thankful for those clothes. As time went on, we finally, my mother said, I tell you what, she said, you know that old shotgun shack that you got out on your land? And the friend told my mother, sure, yeah. And, well, anyway, my mother made arrangements for us to live in that shotgun shack until we could eventually afford to get a place to live again. And we literally lived in, I'd say it was only about 400 square feet, a shotgun shack. Some of the best times of our lives were in that little shotgun shack. But eventually we did get a loan from the bank, and we were able to pay a contractor to start building again. Well, when they put the foundation up for the house, my mother came and got me one day, and she said, I want you to see something. And she took me over there, and there were these big prints, I'm going to call them footprints, okay, in the foundation where that house was going to be built. Everybody was saying that it was a bear. A bear leaves claw marks. I knew about bears a little bit. I'd seen them. I'd followed their tracks. I mean, I knew a little bit about them, enough to know that they leave claw marks. And so this didn't have claw marks. So it did look a little bit like the hind foot of a bear, but it was much bigger, and it didn't have claw marks. And I will tell you, I did try to track that thing. It ended up going down in a creek that ended up being behind our property, right adjacent to our property. It ended up going down that creek, and then I lost being able to track it anymore. So I was kind of disappointed in myself that I couldn't follow those tracks, and I wasn't good enough to track it. So anyways, that was that. And then later, when I was in high school, me and my buddies, when I say buddies, I'm talking about guys and girls, we all grew up together and whatnot, and we all knew each other's families. We used to go camping all the time during the colder months here in Florida. I know some people in the real cold states are probably laughing at me, but it does get cold here, believe it or not. It's that damp cold, I mean, it may not be below zero, but, you get down in the teens or even in the 20s, it feels like below zero. It's very hard to get warm from because it's very damp, a damp cold. Long story short, we were camping, and it was during November. It was probably only in the 40s, it wasn't terribly cold. We had different campsites that we had at different properties and at different friends. Well, one of my buddies, they had a big ranch, and we had made a campsite in the very back, and there was an old railroad trestle back there, and there was a creek that ran, of course, under it. Well, we had made our campsite right near there, and we cleared out an area that was probably, say, about 30 feet in diameter one way, and then it was longer another way. It wasn't quite like a circle. It was more like an oval or something. We were there one weekend during November. I want to say it was during the Thanksgiving break, but I can't for sure say that. My memory's not the greatest anymore. I'm trying to gain it back, but it's not 100% anymore. So long story short, we were camping. It was November, and we were adjacent to this clear-cut hayfield. And a lot of people say, oh, you don't cut hay. Well, what they don't understand is we do cut hay here in Florida late into the season, not just in the summer and the spring. We'll cut hay into the fall even. And so, depending on the weather, of course, right? But anyway, so it was a clear-cut hay field, and back behind it, there was an oak hammock. And this oak hammock was probably about, I'm going to say give or take about 30 acres maybe. We're there, and we're eating good around the fire, and we were having, I'm not going to lie to you, we had some cold beer and we were drinking some beer and trying to act like grown-ups or whatnot. We were all around the fire and everything. Well, it started drizzling. It was drizzling good. It wasn't quite raining, but that cold drizzle. And when it started drizzling pretty heavy, but it wasn't quite a rain. Some of the girls and the guys were like, oh, no, I'm getting all wet. And you know how most people are when it starts to rain a little bit, they act like they're going to melt and they run, So they all kind of scurried into the tents and whatnot. And, I tried to figure out the exact number, but I'm going to say there were between 14 to maybe 18 of us out there. I don't remember every single person, so I think that's a close estimate of the truth. So we were out there, and a few of us stayed around the fire, including me. The fire was going pretty good because we had a bonfire, We had gotten what's called lighter knot. It's like a pine tree, and it's got resin in it, and it burns really, really good, and it burns really hot. So we had gotten lighter knot stumps and whatnot and put them on the fire, and we had a good fire going. But it drizzled enough where the fire was starting to die down pretty good. So it finally stopped drizzling, or at least it slacked off to almost, nothing. And when it did, I went and got some gasoline that I had. We were a bit away from the fire. We weren't like right up against it. Put that cup on the fire, kind of just tossed it real gently, and it went and shot about probably 15 feet up in the air, if I had to guesstimate, maybe a little more. And when it did, we heard a roar from that clear-cut hayfield. We heard a roar back in there around where that oak hammock was. And it was so loud, and I've heard people talk about this, but I never experienced it except for this one time. And my buddies, the girls and the guys that were there that heard it, which we all heard it, they all kind of said the same thing eventually. Some of them didn't talk about it for a long time. Some of them didn't admit it. But eventually they all pretty much said the same thing that I felt. It felt like it resonated through you. And so now when I hear people talk about that, and I know there's a specific name they give it, and I can't remember what it is, but it has to do with the sound like reverberating through your body. That's what it felt like. And so when that happened, guys and girls, friends, they started coming out of the tents like, what was that? And I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, everybody kind of freaked out for a minute there. Like, holy, that kind of stuff. And the girls even screamed some. And I knew that everybody was very upset. I had the only gun in the camp. I had a 30-30. And two of my best buddies that we played ball and sports and all coming up, and we were very good friends. We were the ones that really were the wilderness guys, more so than some of the others. And I'm not in any way putting them down, but, some of them weren't like, you couldn't just take them into the wilderness and have them be comfortable. Some of them were more outside of that arena. So long story short, I told my buddies, I said, we need to go and see what we can see, Let's go and investigate this and see what we can see. I'm not going to lie, we were scared, but I had to see what this was because I never heard anything like it. And for some reason, I don't know why, and I'm not trying to sound like some macho man. I could care less about any of that. But ever since I was a little boy, I've always been that one to run towards danger rather than run away from it. I've always been that one to stay calm when it's the fan rather than freak out. I got my buddies, and we started walking down this cattle path that kind of veered around the clear-cut hayfield, and it went back into that area where the oak hammock was. what I left out is earlier that day before we set up camp and all, I remember I was looking all around the property and everything, and I'm always looking for wildlife and stuff. And I was looking all around the property to see if I saw any deer back in the tree lines or whatnot. And I remember seeing there was a flatbed truck back down there, Okamic was, and it had those Texas rolls of hay on it. And I don't know the exact count, but I think it was like 5 rolls on there. And those rolls are anywhere from like 800 pounds to over 1,000 pounds. So anyway, we were going down this cattle trail, and my buddies were kind of like, we almost huddled together, but we were walking at the same time. And I was scared. I'm not going to sound like some macho man like I wasn't scared. I was scared. They were scared. But we really were trying to get some kind of awareness of what this was, visual or just anything we could find, just something to tell us what this was. So as we're going back in there, my one buddy, he's got that old-fashioned flashlight that had I don't know if it had 4 batteries or 8 batteries. I think it was 8. And it was one of those old flashlights where it had the D batteries, and you always had to hit against your leg because it would go out and stuff. And so he's shaking so bad I can hear the batteries rattling, and the beam is going everywhere. Well, I got my 30-30, and I'm up front. And I said, man, I shined that flashlight right, or you're going to get us killed. And he was trying so hard, and he couldn't get it. He was just shaking too bad. So I said, give me that flashlight. So he gave it to me, and I'm shining it real slow, just like a searchlight, like you do, real slow and steady as I could. And I could still hear every now and then I heard the batteries rattling, so I know I was shaking. What I did is on that truck, it had those big chrome mirrors that stuck out on the side, and I hit one of the back of those, and it flashed back just for a second, and it scared the you-know-what out of us. So then we finally realized what it was, and we kind of, I remember we had like a little nervous laugh for a second, and then kind of just started walking towards it, and so I'm shining the light and whatnot, and we get close enough, because you have to understand this wasn't like some full moon or anything. It was pretty dark back in there. We get closer, and it's starting to get not muddy, but, it's kind of wet, and it's that clear-cut hay field. When you cut it down, there's going to be soil under there, so it wasn't muddy, but it was kind of, if you tracked that in your house and your mama had a nice rug, she wouldn't be too happy. You know what I mean? It's that kind of feeling. So we got closer to the truck, and I hit this big Texas roll of hay with my light, and I realized right away what it was, and I didn't even think about at the time that it had been on the truck before. I mean, I did not even think about that. And I don't know if it's because I was so nervous or what, but I just didn't even put 2 and 2 together. So we get up to it, I'm shining the light, and I notice it's got like mud on one edge or corner. It's not really a corner, it's round, but I grab it like a corner. On the edge of one of the areas of this big roll, it's got like mud on it. And I'm thinking, man, something just rolled this off the truck, or it slid off with the rain. I was just trying to make sense of it. And I started shining the light, and between the Texas roll of hay and the truck, I literally saw like an indentation. What I finally realized is this thing had bounced from the ground. And I know a lot of people say, oh, well, hay wouldn't bounce. Yes, it will. I've dropped hay from the rafters in the barn. We used to have a big barn, and you'd fill it up with hay. You drop a hay bale from the rafters or anything, and it's going to bounce. When I realized that, I got a big lump in my throat, and I was like thinking to myself, this is out of my league. something huge was here and did this. So then I shined, and you could see also where it didn't look like it threw them, but the other hay rolls were off of the truck, and they were kind of to the side of it and whatnot. Looked like something rolled them off. That's all I needed to see. So we started kind of walking with purpose back to the camp. And on the way, I told my buddies, I said, listen, when we get back to the camp, the first thing they're going to do is ask us what we saw, what we heard. They're going to ask us all kind of questions. We don't want to lie to them, but at the same time, we don't want to start a panic. So I said, let's just tell them for now that we didn't see or hear anything and that everything's fine. So we stayed with that plan, got back to the camp, and we told them that. After a while, it probably took a couple of hours or so, everybody kind of calmed down enough where, they went back to their tents and they tried to get some sleep or whatnot. Well, a few of us stayed out by the fire, including me. And I was on the ready. I had my 30-30, which I look back on it now, and it would have been like a BB gun to that thing. But I had my 30-30, and I literally basically stayed up all night, just staying by the fire and trying to guard camp. And again, not trying to sound like some hero, because I'm not. So in the morning, there were a few people, asleep. We had kind of like a blanket. We had that big blanket kind of wrapped around us and stuff. Well, a few of them also went and got blankets and came back out, and some of them slept around the fire and whatnot. It didn't rain or anything else. It got really nice. It was cooler and crisp. It wasn't, raining or any of that stuff. So in the morning, my one friend, Ramona, she had gotten up and she went to this makeshift outhouse that we built. She went to use the bathroom, and she came back. I was aware that she was out there and everything, and because of what had happened that night when that creature roared, I was just really kind of paying extra attention to everybody, and so I knew she had went and all. Well, she came back from there and she kind of whispered to me, like, fuck, I want to show you something. So I go over there to her, and she takes me over by that outhouse. She showed me an impression, and I looked at it good, and I'm not going to pretend it was a big, beautiful impression of Sasquatch, but it was a heavy-set impression, and you could tell whatever it was big. I started looking at it. I actually got down real close to it on my hands and knees. Wanted to see if I could find another one, and I did. And then eventually I found where whatever made this impression had walked all the way around their camp. So I don't know if it did it before the incident, after the incident. That I don't know. And so that was my major wake-up call to say, hey, there's something out there. I don't know what it is. I can't explain it, but I know it's not some normal animal that we have here in Florida. So those were the things, in answer to your question, that really got me to where now I try to really learn about and do my own investigation of learning more about these creatures that I believe exist. And then later, of course, I have had some other encounters that I would love to share with your listeners.
You go right ahead and share whatever you want to, Fox. This is your show, basically. If I was guessing, when you went to the truck, it probably followed you back. But those hay bales, now I have rolled them off of a truck myself before, but like you said, they're anywhere from 900 to 1,200 pounds. And the thing about it, when they sit on a truck or a trailer for a length of time, the bottom gets flat. So it's very hard to get them started to move. Getting them started is a two-person job. Now, once you get them turning, one person can keep them going. But that's pretty significant strength-wise.
Yes, sir. That's the way I thought about it.
I got a few questions if you don't mind, Fox.
I don't mind, Jack.
How old were you when the incident with the horse occurred?
I believe around 7 or maybe closer to 8, but I would say around 7.
Yep, still a child. Do you remember the type of horse?
Yes, sir. The horse that it was actually one of our quarter horses. It stood about 17 and a half, 18 hands at the most, maybe more at 17 for that particular horse.
I can visualize the injuries, and I'm trying to correlate that to possibly a panther, even though you said it was way too big. Panthers stalking an animal like that, they usually take it down from the hindquarters and sink their claws in and get it down and go from there and get a hold of the neck somewhere. And only having injuries, particularly on one side of that animal, that doesn't sound panther behavior. And bears aren't interested in things bigger than them. That's one of the reasons why they avoid people the way they do. Florida black bears, that's not an extremely large bear. The way I remember it, 300 pounds, 400 pounds might be a pretty big black bear for the state of Florida. Black bear getting a claw high enough, unless the bear standing on a hill and the horse happened to be walking by and the bear was in an extremely bad mood for some reason. I think we can rule out a bear for that. And then the only thing you have left is a monster, and that's a pretty good summation for a child. The next thing that happened was impressions in the foundation. And you're absolutely right, claw marks. If it's wet enough to leave an impression in cement. If it was a bear, you should have been able to see claw marks. It doesn't make any sense for anything else. That rear foot is an uncommon shape. One of the things about a bear print, and I haven't tracked that many of them, but the heel mark in a bear is relatively thin compared to the front part of the foot. Do you happen to remember what the back end, the heel end of the foot looked like compared to the front end of the foot? Was it narrow or was it wide? Or
to the best of my recollection, I would put it anywhere between, in the rear, maybe between 4 and 5 inches, right at that. And then the front was wider.
And about how long?
And this is only a guesstimation to the best of my recollection, but I would say probably anywhere between 13 to 15 inches.
Yeah, that's not bear dimensions.
That would be more brown bear. It's not unusual for the hind foot to be 12 to 13 inches, which is non-existent in the state of Florida. Black bears, a large black bear hind foot would be a size 8. Probably 8 inches long, maybe 9. That would be a large black bear.
Yeah, dimensions on that. The length of the foot compared to the width of the foot, that's not bear track geometry, let's say. So when you went out with all these folks near the railroad trestle and you went camping there and you threw some gasoline on the fire and you got a roar in return, how far was the truck in relation to how far you think the roar was away from you?
I would say, and I never have been asked this question, but I would say that oak hammock, the corner from our camp, would have been about roughly 175 yards. The truck itself from the perimeter of that oak hammock, where the shadow line would be during the day, it was probably only about 35 yards maybe from that shadow line, of the oak hammock. in from the camp where we were about 175 yards.
So you're moving up to an oak hammock, and habitat in that part of the country, moving up to an oak hammock, it's normally pretty scrubby. You get under the oak hammock, there's enough shade under the oak hammock to kill out a bunch of the undergrowth. But it's pretty scrubby moving up to the oak hammock. Do you remember any movement getting to and from the oak hammock anywhere around you?
Honestly, I don't. And you're right, there were some little scrub oaks, and also we have a lot of grapevines here in Florida, wild grapevines. And I had been in that oak hammock before, during the day. We'd been in there squirrel hunting and stuff. So I knew right around that perimeter we had some nice grapevines. And then we had like blackberry bushes, with some of those scrub oaks. And we even had some persimmons right around there. But as far as here, we did not hear anything. We heard that roar, and we could hear like our breathing. We could hear our little bit of laughter when we had that nervous laugh, and our whispering you could hear and everything. But honestly, we didn't hear any movement or anything. I was listening. Believe me, I had situational awareness. I was listening to see if I heard anything because I was on swivel. I mean, I was scared. I was alert. You know how your senses are heightened when you're scared like that, and especially when you think there might be a predator stalking you or around you. So I was on high alert with my senses, and I even asked my buddies later about it several times, and they said they didn't hear anything either. So, no, we didn't hear anything. That's what was so peculiar.
And how close were you guys grouped together? How much space did you have between you?
You mean me and my buddies that went to investigate?
Yeah, I forget you said you guys were in a football huddle.
I had an old army jacket on, and they were kind of holding on to my jacket. I remember feeling their hands on me, So that's why I described it as being huddled together. We obviously weren't walking with our arms around one another. I didn't mean to give that impression.
The reason I asked about moving to and from the oak hammock, and how many people did you say went with you?
Only 2 of my buddies. There were only 3 of us.
Moving that closely together, and moving through scrub and leaf litter and those things, it's hard to differentiate, or it's hard to hear. When I'm out and I'm with a party like that, I try to get about 20 yards-ish separation so that I can really differentiate my noise, their noise, and the noise of something else. And like Nate says, you went out there to investigate, and night vision's a funny thing. Shadows moving from color to monochrome, and being able to see for us at night is not as acute as with wildlife that does that thing every day. So it's very likely that if something was out there that made that noise, that it did follow you back. So I would guess, just like Nate did, because that's all we can do is guess, is that you went out there, communication, you caused a little bit of a disturbance. You were there having a good time, playing some country music, probably nothing really intrusive. Probably some laughter and some good times, maybe a couple of beers. That wasn't intrusive, and you threw some gasoline on the fire, and that was probably interpreted as intrusive. And in return, you got an alarmed / intrusive response. In response to that communication of, hey, you just startled me, ticked me off, you made the communication of, well, I'm going to come see you. Animals, unless they're within the same pack, don't apologize. And I wouldn't think if there was a pack animal out there that it took your approach as an apology. So you went out there, and if it exists, it was probably aware that you were not able to spot, detect, were aware of it. And it probably followed you back. It was outnumbered. and these things in the southeast aren't reported as 3 to 4 times our size. I would guess that, like I said, should it exist, that it followed you back, circled your camp, did an assessment. One, either found that you weren't a threat, or two, assessed that the threat was higher than it wanted to endure and engage you, and then went on about its way. Does that sound plausible?
Absolutely, and that just gave me chills like crazy. Because honestly, I never thought of it following us back. I mean, it makes perfect sense, but doggone, that scares the heck out of me thinking about that.
That's pretty common behavior. If you consider the report and the things that you hear on various podcasts, that's pretty common behavior. It's not about your intentions or what you think or what you intend. It's what they perceive. Now, if they perceive a threat or if they perceive aggression on your part or something like that, then, it has nothing to do with what you meant to do. It has nothing to do with the fact that y'all were just a bunch of kids having a good time. That's not what it's about. It's about what this particular creature perceives your actions to be, and it responds accordingly. And yes, Jack, probably right on when it got there and saw as many people as you had in that camp, and that transfers to other predatory behavior in grizzly country. It's better to travel in groups. When you encounter a bear, have that group spread out so that bear can easily recognize each individual person. And you've got a good chance of it deciding, just like Jack said, the threat being more than it wants to deal with and goes on its merry way. But yeah, that's a very plausible scenario. And it's a very good educated guess. Of course, that's what we usually do, is educated guess, because I can't be naive enough to think that I have any idea what a booger thinks.
So we were on the phone last night, and you talked a little bit about going fishing in the lily pads and seeing something that really didn't make any sense. You can't say it was Bigfoot, but it didn't move like a bear. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, sir. I'll be happy to talk about what you asked me to. So we have these lakes here in Florida called the Five Finger Lakes. And one of them is our largest lake that we have, which is Lake Kissimmee. And there's a lake that attaches to it. There's 4 more lakes that attach to it, but one in particular called Lake Hashnahal. It's a good-sized lake. It's one of these lakes that takes you about 20 minutes to get across it in the go-fast boat. So I was fishing. I had somebody with me, which I won't mention their name. They haven't really talked about it since. I know they know that we saw something for sure, too. So we were fishing. We were off of the shore. We were waiting, and we were fishing into the lily pads. We were catching some nice bass, and, I was, just watching and taking in all the wildlife, all the birds, all the different things around there. Well, again, not too far, there was an oak hammock. And that oak hammock, we were probably about 25 yards off of the shoreline, maybe. And it was kind of a bend where we were fishing. I don't know how many yards. I can't even really say because I'd be lying. But enough where you could get a good visual on something. It wasn't too far and it wasn't too close. Where that cove was, just beyond that, there was another oak hammock. We have a lot of them in Florida. I was just looking over there and looking at some shorebirds and whatnot. And all of a sudden, I seen something come out of that oak hammock. I'm not going to lie to you, the first thing I thought is that's a bear. And it came out of the oak hammock. But one thing I do remember stuck out in my mind, came out walking on all fours. But it didn't do that kind of swaying thing that bears do. And I remember in my mind, I was thinking, man, this thing moves smooth. This thing is really stealth. It must be not wanting to be seen, you know. So I'm being real still and I'm watching it. I quit fishing and everything. And it goes down to the water and it kind of squats. It seemed like it was on its haunches to me, but it was leaning in towards the water. And all of a sudden, this thing made a swack at the shoreline, at the water. I don't know any human that can make a splash that loud. And when it did, it splashed a good-sized bass up on the shore. And it splashed it so hard that the bass went past it and was laying up on the shore. And I could still see this fish in that grass. It was kind of flopping around. And this thing kind of turned real smooth, never fast, never abrupt, just turned. And what it looked like to me, this thing, this is the part that's hard for me to understand. It looked like this bear, at least that's all that was in my mind, is it's a bear. It looked like it grabbed this fish and put it in its mouth. But I don't see how a bear could grab a fish and put it in its mouth with its paw. It never got on 2 feet or anything. It stayed on all fours. And it just grabbed this fish, put it in its mouth, and walked into the tree line and disappeared. Until y'all told me what you surmise out of your experiences and all the things that you know about all the scientific research that y'all have done, which I highly respect y'all for, because you guys do real research. You know, you don't just go out there and beat on trees and all that. You literally have a true scientific database for these sightings and these experiences that people have had. That's awesome. But till y'all told me last night, you thought of it, I've always believed that it had to have been a bear. And you guys woke me up to the fact, not because you were trying to persuade me to one belief or another, but you were just telling me the physical characteristics and everything and things that I'd either forgotten or don't know about, you know, bears, that now it's woken me up to the fact that I don't believe it was a bear. And I will tell you, I remember distinctly it didn't have that big snout that a bear has. And remember, I'm looking at its profile. So that would have been one of the distinct things that I saw. Now, could it have been that the lighting maybe blocked out its profile enough where I didn't see that snout? Yes, that's plausible. But I don't think so. I just don't think it had that snout like a bear has. And the thing that threw me more than anything, how smooth this thing was. It didn't even, it looked just effortless. Like, I'd seen bears in the wild and by then and everything, and I never saw a bear move like that. So that's my encounter there. I sure respect y'all's opinions about it.
Well, black bear behavior doesn't normally begin with something in the black bear's front feet. Black bear will put something in its mouth, sit back on its haunches, rock its front feet off the ground, and it might clumsily wobble something in between its front feet while it's eating it. A black bear's front feet, the toes aren't very long. And the paw, the pad, is pretty big. It can't roll something up the size of a bass in that paw and pick it up off the ground. Now, people that don't deal with animals like that says, well, it's got a handful of claws. Maybe it just reached down and stuck its claws in it and stuck it in its mouth. If anyone can find a video or can take a video of a bear doing that, please send it to me. That would be absolutely amazing. But that's not the way that black bears operate. They start out with something in their mouth. They may rock onto their haunches, their rump, roll their front feet off the ground, and sit there and help keep whatever's in their mouth around their mouth. while they munch on it. But it's an acrobatic feat in front of it. And they do it, especially in captivity. They train bears, and bears adapt different behaviors where they can do that thing and roll something up and kind of juggle it between their paws and play with it and make people laugh and smile. But in the wild, I'm not aware of that being a typical black bear behavior. And bears in general tend to fish in streams, moving water. They'll let things come to them. They'll let that stream, that current, bring the fish to them. They're not out there stalking on the edge of a lake or a pond. I'm sure it happens. And maybe that's what did happen. It's a rarity. You saw it one time and you've been in the woods a lot. I've seen it never. I'm pretty sure Nate's going to answer the same way. He's seen it never. But then again, I can't say that I've seen an extraordinary number of black bears operating unaware of me for an extended period of time. That's the reason I'm a skeptic. I haven't had that definitive thing where I could say, yep, that's Bigfoot right there. I've seen and had many, many things happen that I can't explain, but I've never watched it operate. I've never watched it blink, breathe, take a few steps. I've never picked a tick off of one. I've never smelled one's breath, nothing like that. I'm still a skeptic. You got anything to add, Nate?
Bear behavior is different as night and day between a black bear and a brown bear. Now, brown bear are predominantly fishermen, and they have several techniques, anywhere from standing in a stream and catching the salmon when it jumps to swatting one to the bank. When they proceed to eat the fish, they tend to put their paws on the fish, and they'll reach down and take it with their mouth, and they'll pull the skin off the fish. They eat skin, the guts, and when the fishing is good, they leave the rest of it. They eat the highest protein things and leave the rest of it lay. Black bears are not known for their fishing skills. Not saying that they don't fish. I'm sure they do. They're definitely omnivores. They will eat anything that don't eat them first. But the brown bear survive on salmon. That's what they do. Black bears are just not that. When a bear moves, they don't look smooth in anything they do. How they get the agility and the speed that they get while looking like they do, I have no idea. But when you see a bear, you know it's a bear. If you don't know it's a bear, it's probably not a bear.
A bear is part of the flash photography that we have set in our head. You can catch a glimpse of something, and it may not be a bear, but your mind will take a snapshot of that in that instant and say, that was a bear. And you go back and you find out that, it wasn't a bear, or maybe it was. Was it 1 foot or 2 feet that it used to pick up the fish? Do you remember?
It was its right paw or foot, and I could see it clearly picked it up with its right paw, and it put it in its mouth, and then it just eased right back into those woods.
Yeah, that's a bear disqualifier for me. Like I said, unless somebody can send me that. How big was this thing when it was sitting on its haunches? How tall?
It looked like a giant bear. I used to do a lot of bear clients. One of my clients, he's actually a very famous artist. He's got a piece of property, and he gets a lot of bears on it. He hired me to help manage the bears. It ended up being a bear that was over 500 pounds, is my whole point. That's a big bear. Like Nate said, most of our bears are anywhere between 250, 350. Those are your average bears in Florida. It looked like it was the largest bear that I can imagine here in Florida. It was huge. And as far as height, all I know is I was down in the water, and it looked like it was a bit taller than me. Now, mind you, I was younger at this time, so I was nowhere near as tall as I am now, but I was every bit of 5 feet tall, and it was taller than me. The land was pretty level with the water level, and I was in about a little above my knees, and this thing was taller than me. You are better at estimating height than I am when it comes to that. So, in answer to your question, I just say it looked like a giant bear to me. But again, I didn't see a snout, and I don't remember any ears like you have on a bear. Those are the things that I don't remember. I don't remember real long hair like you hear about with the Sasquatches. The hair did look like a very dark brown to almost black. That's about all I can remember with the features.
Do you remember any shoulders?
I feel like I saw what I believe were shoulders. And it was big. Whatever it was big. That's the one thing I can say for sure. And the other thing I can say for sure is it was very stealth, and it was a hell of a fisherman, because it swiped that fish up like it knew what it was doing, like it did that every day, you know. And what really surprised me is I don't think it was ever aware of me. I don't think it ever saw me. Maybe it was, but it never looked over at me or anything.
Yeah, most wild animals, when they spot you, they'll stare at you for a few minutes, trying to figure out what you are. When I've seen bears operate, when they move, it's almost like they're punching the ground. It doesn't matter if they're walking or they're running. The placement of the foot on the ground is a significant impact. Right? A lot of animals step relatively lightly, not bears. When a bear's running, you can literally see the vibrations of those impacts ripple through its body. And even when they're walking, particularly a larger bear, when it takes a step, especially on its front feet, if it's got any fat on it particularly, you can see the impact of that step in the animal's body. So again, it doesn't fit in the norm. It's an outlier. Can you say, like me, it's Bigfoot right there? I don't think you can say that either. You haven't said that. But we're running up on about an hour, and that's normally about what our listeners can stand for one shot anyway. You got any other questions you'd like to ask, Nate?
I want to say I appreciate Fox being here, and I really appreciate what he does with the wildlife. I think that about wraps it up for me.
Well, as usual, I can absolutely agree. And I'd also like to thank Fox for coming on and sharing his encounters with us. Chances are we're going to have Fox back on in the future. He has several more unexplained odd occurrences that he'd like to share with us. If that's all right with you, Fox.
Absolutely. I'd be honored to be back on. If you don't mind, I'd like to tell people about my company.
Absolutely. I also understand that you have a GoFundMe. Why don't you tell the folks a little bit about that stuff?
The GoFundMe, and it's Wild Animals Need Saving Too. You'll see a picture of me and everything, and below that picture it says read more. And if you click that, it'll drop down my story, and also has other pictures of wildlife I've captured and whatnot, including the baby panther. But anyways, you'll see literally on there my story. And yeah, if you guys could find it in your hearts to help out in any way, I'd sure appreciate it. It's for a great cause. And if you want to get a hold of me, I'm very approachable. I know a lot of people say, oh, yeah, you can email me or you can, write me, and they never get back to you. But I assure you, if you write me, I will certainly get back to you. So if you want to get a hold of me, you can get a hold of me at wildlifeman65@gmail.com. Now, I did have a website. Unfortunately, it got hacked, and I'm working on getting another one. But I do have a Facebook, and it's simply under Wild Wild Pest. WILD, pest, PEST, like Wild Wild West, but Wild Wild Pest. And I want to thank your listeners for putting up with me sharing my encounters. I hope you really enjoyed it. I want to thank you, Nate, and I want to thank you, Jack, for being so gracious to me and for being now mentors in my life and helping me to assimilate and understand better about my encounters and be able to help in any way I can. It was a great honor for me to be on your show. And I have a lot of respect for y'all, and I really appreciate it.
We appreciate the good words, Fox. Also, if you're in Florida, feel free to contact Fox. And if anybody has interest in being on the show, they can contact us through the website. You know, if you have an encounter, we're interested. We want to hear it. Without your encounters, our database does not work. Jack, you want to add anything before we sign off?
Well, like you, I'd like to thank Fox and to say that the honor and the pleasure has been all ours. If you'd like to get in contact with us, you can go to www.bigdog, the letter T, the number 2, B, that's bigdogt2b.com. There you can find our sighting questionnaire. You can click on the Contact Us button and send us an email. And as usual, be careful. And remember that if you decide to step off the trail, if you decide to step off the pavement, and you go back into places where people normally don't go, you need to be mentally, physically, and emotionally prepared for what you may encounter. God bless. Take care. We love you. And until next time, have a good evening.